Today's topic is amplifier power, and it comes from Zanonis in Lithuania. That's a country I've very much always wanted to go to, and I have no clue. I guess it's in Eastern Europe, and hate to be an ignorant American, but that sounds pretty exotic. So I would love to visit your country someday. Zanonis says, "Hey Paul, I have Sonus Faber Cremona Auditor bookshelf speakers. They're 88 dB at 4 ohms. And I'm looking for a suitable amplifier to power them. I used to think that a more powerful amp is generally better, but according to your volume control video, the lower amp volume is the less the amp shines. Is it correct that I would benefit from more from the amplifier that is less powerful so I could turn the volume louder?" That's a really good question, and I'm not quite sure how to answer that because I don't want to steer you wrong. Clearly, I have made some people a little bit uncomfortable with the volume control thing. Let's jump into that first. Okay. So I have said for years that volume controls are brakes, not gas pedals. And it's an important distinction to talk about. And the reason is most people believe that a volume control, the higher I turn it, it's kind of like revving up the car. I'm going to stress the engine out. When actually the opposite is true, because volume controls start with a level and then they just can turn it down. Can't turn it up, right? Volume controls don't have gain. So the higher the level of your volume control, the less brake you're applying and the better it sounds. That's the basic premise here that we're talking about. Now, let's talk about in real life, because everything is a trade-off and a compromise, and we really have to think about how all this is working without going too far in any one direction. One of the reasons I always talk about volume controls is because I don't like pots. So when we refer to these volume controls, I am referring to a pot, okay, to a potentiometer, a variable resistor in a round canister or a slide pot, which you rarely see these days, or even a stepped attenuator. But mostly it's pots, and most preamps use pots. And that's where you want to have that pot in the circuit as little as possible, okay? Now, we solved that problem quite a while ago. So our two preamps, the Stellar Gain Cell DAC and the BHK Signature preamp, they don't have pots. You can use those at any volume level and the sound is the same. And I'm sure other manufacturers likely have done something similar, though I don't know of any. I imagine they have. So let's be very specific about it. If you're using one of ours, don't worry about it. If you're using somebody else's that has a pot, whether motorized or not, then I wouldn't concern myself. If you're using a remote control, and how many preamps today don't have remote controls, right? Unless that knob is visibly turning like with a motor, chances are you don't have a pot, okay? So chances are what you have is an electronic volume control, and those can be CMOS switches, that can be any number of things, and there the idea of too low or too high gain doesn't apply quite as much. They sound pretty much the same at higher or lower levels. I don't think they sound very good, and that's why we don't use them, but they aren't specifically volume dependent on how they do sound. So now that we're sort of on a level playing field, let's talk about the amps. Your Sonus Faber is 88 dB. That's relatively low. So you need power. You need to be able to crank that sucker up, and you're going to need some power to do it because it's a relatively inefficient loudspeaker. And if I had to make a choice between a big amplifier or a small amplifier, and all things being equal, I go for the big amp, always. More watts means more headroom, better linearity of the amplifier, and given a choice, go for the larger amplifier if all things are equal. So like we have a product called the M700. Those are in the Stellar series. That's 700 watt amplifier. It's a monoblock, right? Now that sounds better than our 300 watt version, but the gain is the same. So here's where we diverge again. And I don't want this to get too confusing. The amount of watts and the gain of the amplifier are not related to each other. So in the 300 watt S300 Stellar product, it puts out 300 watts into 4 ohms, which is a decent amount of power. If you put 1 volt into that amplifier, you're going to get a certain loudness out. If you take the M700, which has more than double the wattage capability, and you put 1 volt into the M700, you're going to get exactly the same loudness out of your loudspeaker. 700, 300, same loudness for a given input voltage. We have to separate gain, voltage in versus voltage out, and watts. So they're very different. We've talked about it before. I hope that helps you a little bit, and we can always talk about it again. All right. Thank you for the question, and let's do it again tomorrow. All right.